Rokt helps retailers make more of every transaction. When someone is already buying online or in-app, Rokt makes it possible to show relevant ads and offer content in that moment, like subscriptions, upgrades, or loyalty perks. So instead of interruptive advertising, customers see something more useful and more timely. For retailers, that creates more value from the transaction. For customers, it creates a better experience. That's Rokt, making every transaction more valuable. On today's flight of the Retail Pilot, I am joined by Tanya Golesic, CEO of Mackage, the Canadian luxury outerwear brand known for combining elevated design with technical performance. Appointed in 2021, she brought global fashion experience from Jimmy Choo, Canada Goose, Marc Jacobs, Ralph Lauren, and the Jones Group. At Mackage, she has guided the brand's evolution from outerwear specialist to global luxury lifestyle company, expanding product categories, retail, e-commerce, and international reach. Her strategy emphasizes craftsmanship, innovation, sustainability, disciplined growth, and storytelling. Golesic has also championed collaborations, athlete partnerships, and high-impact campaigns while leading with a team-first approach focused on agility and long-term global scale. Tanya, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Ken.
It's good to see you again. We just saw each other recently at The Lead,
Yes, we did.
where you were the keynote star with our good friend Simeon Siegel. It was a
Yes.
great way for me to prep for today. Tanya, take us through your journey to where you are today, both from a personal perspective and professional point of view.
Sure. First, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Ken, the legend that you are. So from a personal perspective, just quickly, I was born in Canada. My parents came from the former Yugoslavia. Uh, at that time, it was Yugoslavia, but Croatia now. And they moved to Canada, and I was born in Canada. So, um, when we talk about roles and jobs and life, and I think just your history of where you came from plays such a huge role in that. So born in Canada to Croatian parents, my mother was a retailer, so I developed a fondness for fashion from a very early age, I would say. And then, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, because Canada is such a small country, we don't necessarily have a huge booming fashion industry. So I knew probably in 1920 that if I wanted to pursue a career in fashion and work for a large brand, that I would have to move either to the US, to Italy, or to France. My French is not very good. My Italian is non-existent, so New York was the choice. And I moved to New York in 2001. So this is really where I would say that I really launched my career to where I am today. And as you mentioned at the beginning, I started my career in New York at Ralph Lauren. And from Ralph Lauren, I moved from a basically, at that time, a Ralph Lauren, amazing brand, and really technically, I would say the only luxury fashion that we have in the US per se, but a great training ground. I was recruited from Ralph Lauren to Jones in New York at the time, where I was recruited to be the SVP of sales and planning for 3 Jones brands. So there was a lot of change at that time at Jones, a lot of kind of trying to figure out who the consumer was and where Jones was shifting from an overall strategy standpoint. So that was a very interesting time at Jones. Richard Dixon was there at the time. So it's interesting to see how, a lot of people in fashion move and where they move over the years. So, and then from there, I was recruited by LVMH. And I, at that time, was working for Marc Jacobs. And when I joined LVMH, Marc Jacobs was the creative director of Louis Vuitton at the time, but also had a massive Marc by Marc Jacobs business. So I was the senior vice president of global sales and planning for Marc by Marc Jacobs. And I have to tell you, between Ralph Lauren and Marc Jacobs, those were two of my favorite jobs from a learning perspective. Ralph Lauren, because it was really, as a Canadian, moving to America, even though people think we're the same, we're not, and understanding and learning the American way of doing business, right? And never mind America, it's brand, but it's also New York, right? Where New York is so intense, and that shift in culture was, I really felt when I first moved to New York. And then moving into LVMH, where you're talking primarily about a French company, a European company. So again, another culture shift, culture change versus an all American brand. So I would say that those two companies probably played the biggest role in my development in terms of brands, in terms of luxury, and understanding global businesses. So LVMH, Marc Jacobs, another big time change at that time, where when I started at Marc Jacobs, it was Marc by Marc Jacobs, and then there was a new management that came in, and we changed the brand from two brands, Marc Jacobs and Marc by Marc, to Marc Jacobs. And at that time, which I thought was amazing because I traveled a lot within this role, I learned a lot globally about branding, about how LVMH sees brands, how they invest a lot of time in growing brands, which is very different sometimes from the American point of view. Um, and then I was recruited by Bain Capital at that time. They had just bought the majority of Canada Goose, and they were looking for a Canadian. So I ticked that box, who managed a global luxury business and understood how to take, at that time, which was a very small Canada Goose business, and bring efficiencies and processes to the business in order from it to go from a startup to a global luxury brand. And so that was a role that I thought was interesting, A, because I grew up in Canada. I thought the brand at the time was interesting based on what the strategy was in terms of growth, which was global and within luxury. So I moved back to Toronto at that time, and I was at Canada Goose when Canada Goose was about the same size as Mackage is today. So pre-IPO, today they're a very large business, and um, so I really went from this corporate type of LVMH, corporate Jones, corporate Ralph Lauren into this startup private equity mentality, which was very interesting because I always say to people, it's not, this is the fashion industry is not an industry for the weak of heart, especially when you're, sandwiched in between a founder and private equity, right? With two very kind of different and opposing opinions, yet you're the deal maker or the peacemaker that sits in between the two. And then from Canada Goose, like I said, a totally different experience. Back in Canada, I was there for a year and a half only. I definitely felt a huge cultural difference from being in New York for over 10 years and going back to Toronto. And I really wanted to come back to New York after I felt that cultural shift. And so I was in my role at Goose, and then I was recruited at the time to be the president of Jimmy Choo. Jimmy Choo. I was there for 6.5 years. During my time at Choo, we were bought by Capri Holdings, so Jimmy Choo, Michael Kors, and Versace. So I had met John Idol years before and saw John Idol again, and then worked for John Idol, which was a really great time at Jimmy Choo. But my first week at Jimmy Choo, I was actually approached by a recruiter who I'm also friendly with, who said, I have this private equity company. They just bought a brand you may know from Canada called Mackage. Would you be interested in talking to them? I said, absolutely not. I just started my job at Jimmy Choo, which I was very excited about. And they said, no, no, could you just go and talk to them so they can kind of understand, the outerwear space, et cetera. So I did. And that was basically what I call a 6.5 year interview to the point where when I was at Jimmy Choo 6.5 years later, they called me again after COVID and said, we're looking for a CEO. We talked to you 6.5 years ago, and we've exchanged stories and things over the years, but we would love to meet with you again. And I thought this would be a very interesting role based on the 6.5 years of going through the different iterations of Jimmy Choo coming out of COVID. And I thought, okay, maybe this is my time now to put my stamp on a brand, and tell the story and be part of that marketing story as well. And I joined Mackage in July of 2021, and here we are.
So you went from working for one private equity group that owned a Canadian outerwear brand, taking 6 years off working for Jimmy Choo, and then you went back to another private equity group to head up a Canadian outerwear brand. Is that
Correct.
correct?
That is
Okay.
absolutely correct.
Wow. Okay. So you knew what you were getting into. And as you said, you went through a 6.5 year interview. I guess they liked you a lot to keep calling you, which is a good thing. What, just for our listeners, the private equity firm that owns Mackage is,
Lee Equity
and where are they based?
here in New York.
Great. That's what you want. You want the private equity people sitting right next to you all the time, I'm sure.
Yes.
Okay. So give us a little bit of a more of a high level summary of Mackage as a brand in terms of positioning and approximate size. I know we can't do numbers, you're privately held, but it's bigger than a bread box. It may not be a billion, which you talk about as the ultimate goal, but maybe just some kind of general range if that's possible. And we'll
Sure.
get into the distribution model later.
Yep. So, Mackage was a company founded in 1999, in Montreal, and at that time, it was primarily outerwear. Um, when I joined the company, or the reason I joined the company, is that Lee Equity and the founders at that time really had one thing that was super unique was the fact that we had amazing product, and you can work in many companies and many brands and they can have amazing marketing stories, but then when you get to the actual product it's kind of, you know, it's hit or miss, where that wasn't the case at all with Mackage. So I thought, this is interesting. We have a brand that has craftsmanship, quality, beautiful product. The minute you put the product on you wouldn't want to take the product off, but it was lacking a brand story. It was lacking marketing, it was lacking, storytelling, and so that's what I found intriguing about, this role, and that's the reason I joined the company. Um, and so I think that, uh, so when I joined, we were just coming out of COVID. So it was 2021, Canada was still not open because Canada closed much longer than the US did, as did Europe. So it was the challenge was, okay, this isn't me just walking into a business that's, just running along and having to continue to grow the brand. It was, okay, so what do we stand for? Who are we? What happened during COVID? And then how do we recover from that? How do we bring Canada back? How do we open our stores in Canada? And how do we also figure out our growth trajectory over the next 3 years? So when I joined the company, again, because I can't disclose numbers, we were in, the hundreds of millions, which we're still in the hundreds of millions, but in a bigger way. So there was definitely an appetite for the brand. There was definitely the people who knew the brand, and our stores were profitable and our business was good, but we had so much more runway for growth and we had so much storytelling and such a huge opportunity to bring more brand awareness to the world and to the globe.
And predominantly you were a Canadian brand. You had some distribution in the United States, but was it the majority of business being done in Canada?
Correct. I would tell you that at that time it was an 80-20, close to an 80-20 in terms of the Canada US split. Obviously, when the founders started the company and grew the company, it was very much Canadian based. And that's where the stores, so we had a fleet of stores in Canada. We had a store in New York. We also had a store in Boston. So, so there was definitely opportunity for growth. No stores in Europe, no stores in China, Korea, Japan at that time. So it was a very much a long runway, but an exciting one. And that's the reason essentially why I joined.
Your vision when you took the job versus where the company was at the time, describe to us just the spread on what you inherited versus what you saw the brand could be.
What I inherited was a great foundation. Um, mainly at the time rooted in down outerwear. And so having my previous experience at another brand, I knew that down can't be a 12-month strategy, right? I mean, there's nowhere in the world unless, we're, in the Arctic, for example, that you can base a retail business, an e-commerce business, a wholesale business on just down outerwear. Because it doesn't provide a seasonless or 12-month business, right? So I knew that we had a great base with the core that we had, with the down that we had, that people loved it. But I needed to understand the history, meaning what else have we made, right? Because we were founded in 1999. We were not founded in down. So when I was able to sit with the founder and go into the archives and see that we actually started in leather, we started in wool, cashmere, in fabrications that other outerwear brands weren't doing, a light came on in my head and thought, well, if this is what our heritage is, this is what we should be talking about, right? In addition to obviously down. So we hired a new head of design. We have a great team in Montreal, and it's the same team basically as when I started. The team in Montreal is very, very, very focused on functionality and innovation. So they understand all of the functional parts of the business and design. So whether it's waterproof or seam sealing or windproof, all of those things. They were very, very, very good at technical. And what we really needed was someone who understood fashion, right? And what else we could do beyond just outerwear. And as you know, you can't just start from outerwear and then all of a sudden, start selling bathing suits or start selling footwear. You have to have the relationship with your clientele, with your consumer, for them to accept you as part of a lifestyle. So initially, my mission statement was that we were going to make Mackage into a global luxury lifestyle brand. But in order to do that, I needed to swing the pendulum a little bit out of down and into other categories to test to see if our customer liked the other categories that we were coming to the table with, like wool, like leather, like trench, and different, still outerwear, but outerwear that you were able to wear outside of the snow, right? So you were able to wear for essentially 12 months a year.
And your customer really, when you took over, was predominantly a woman. What percent of the sales was it like 90% women's? I don't even know if you had men's when you took over.
No, we had men's. That's actually a really interesting observation because a lot of people say that we definitely had men's, but women's was probably 75% of our business at that time. So we spoke very much to a female consumer, which is great, but we needed to have a better balance. And obviously, my strategy from the beginning was to have a 50-50 split. And after 5 years now, we're probably a 65-35 split, which is a huge difference from when I started. And a lot of that has to do with not only product and expanding product categories, but also marketing and marketing campaigns that are directed at the male consumer.
I read somewhere you talked about developing product where it was aesthetics that protect. Expand upon that a little bit more.
So, um, as part of the brand building and part of the brand, obviously every CEO has a brand book and a book describing what the brand is, a brand ethos, a Venn diagram. And the one thing that we've learned with consumer studies, along with just our own internal culture, is that people really like our fit. People really like our craftsmanship. People really, um, the Mackage customer is very much more of a fitted fashion kind of person versus a big parka kind of person that doesn't care about necessarily the aesthetics piece of the jacket, is more about warmth. But our consumer, which is really interesting, they want to be warm or they want to be dry or they want to be protected from the elements and have the innovation and the technicality piece, but they also want it to be fashion. So it still has to resonate. It still has to be an addition to their wardrobe that they can wear at any time, not only when they're being protected from the cold. So aesthetics that protect was a part of our ethos and is part of our ethos today. It's the lens that we look through for whether it's marketing, whether it's for product extensions, brand extensions. And it's really about having the fashion that is combined with functionality and technicality, right? That those two things are married together. So it's the aesthetics piece, which is the style piece, and then the protection piece, which is obviously the functional piece of the brand. So that's kind of the brand halo, if you will, that or the filter, not the halo, the filter that we put everything through when it comes to marketing, when it comes to design, when it comes to anything that we do that fits into the Mackage world.
If you think about the competitive set today, where's Mackage hanging in a Bloomingdale's or in a high-end department store? Who would the competitors be?
So depending on the department store, because we do have shop and shop, so more lifestyle versus sitting on an outerwear floor. But a lot of the time, I would tell you that our natural neighborhood or biggest neighbor is always Montclair. I would say that Montclair, you know, where they are today is where, I would hope we could get to or be. And a similar story that it started in outerwear, started in ski, and now has, turned into a full lifestyle brand. So, it's the usual suspects when it comes to outerwear. So we have a lot of our Canadian friends as well as Montclair. And then in Europe, because you have different brands in Europe like Full Sap and other brands, ski brands that we will sit with. But what we're really trying to do is pull ourselves out of that outerwear floor and onto a floor where we're able to sit for 12 months and offer more than just outerwear. So, whether it's in a Saks or a Bergdorf, we can very much be on a contemporary floor, on a designer floor, and flex in and out in terms of the other luxury brands that we sit with today.
Since you took over 5 years ago, what kind of growth have you experienced going after these specific strategies? And we'll talk about also direct to consumer, your distribution model, international, because you've accomplished a great deal in a 5-year period.
Thank you. Yeah, it's 5 years. That feels like 10 years in a good way, just because, the one thing I'll say about this team specifically, whether it's the US, Canada, Asia, or Europe, is and this is the benefit of a startup. A startup versus a corporate company, as I mentioned in my previous comments, is we're very nimble and we're able to act and react very quickly. So when we're testing or we're trying, we're able to make the decisions we need to make in a very quick way. Where, to the other corporate companies that I mentioned before, it could take 6 months, it could take 3 months, right? But because we're still in that early phase of growth, we're able to make, be very analytical and make smart decisions quickly and react to those smart decisions. Um, we have grown, and last year specifically, 2025 was, knock on wood, a record year for us. We had double-digit growth from 2024 to 2025. And the reason I highlight 25 is because 25 was the year that we were finally in a position to be able to introduce properly spring product. I mean, spring product in the past was maybe 2% of our business, lighter puffers or lighter rainwear. But last year in 2025, we really launched a spring collection, and it was not only leather, not only trench, not only hybrids and knits, but also segments of ready to wear and rainwear that were highly successful for us. And what was great about that was the fact that our clientele, our consumer, our Mercage fans reacted to spring, that they weren't just waiting until September or October to buy a puffer or to buy ski or to buy a new heavier weight jacket. So this massive shift that has happened over the last 5 years from heavyweight down probably being 50% of our business to it being really more not even about heavyweight down anymore. It's really about light and medium weight down because people don't need heavyweight down the way they used to. And even growing up in Canada today, when I go to Montreal, which is, one of the coldest cities in the world, I would say, unless you're, I mean, I don't know where you're going that you're ever going to be outside freezing for 8 hours, right? You go to your car, you go from the parking lot, you go from your home, you take the subway. And anyone who's wearing super, super heavyweight down or otherwise, you're dying by the time you get to the office, right? You can't, no one needs that much warmth unless you're on an expedition. So, a lot of shifts have happened, and 2025 was that first year where we saw spring out of the gate. You know, we were up January through September 1st, we were up 30% to the year before. So just this huge white space for us of what people were looking to us for, whether it's hoodies, sweatshirts, track pants, tracksuits, athleisure. We did some, wool and cashmere knitwear, things that our consumer reacted to and really, really liked, and continue to see us more than just once a year or once every 2 years for a new, heavier piece.
And in addition to that, we discussed this earlier, you've really evolved the importance of the logo or the
Yeah.
brand mark specifically. Would you say the majority of product today has either the brand mark or the name on it somewhere that's visible to the consumer?
Um, I would say it's 50-50, and that is because the other part of the strategy that we introduced or changed was, we were really like an $850 to $1,200 price point when I first started. And by bringing in our new head of design who has worked, for a lot of luxury brands, even in couture, we were able to stretch from 850, the 850 to 1250. But our key selling price point right now, I would say, is 1250 to 2000. So we were able to not increase the AUR, not just take all of our jackets and increase the price, but introduce new levels of product all the way to $3,500 that our consumer was looking for. It's just, whether we do it in shearling or we do it in leather or we do it in cashmere. It's just a different level of business of product that people are loving from us, which is great because, as you know, once you're a certain size of company, you can't just increase your AUR and hope it sells, right? So at this stage, we're still able to test, right, and see those levels. So that was a huge piece of it, was being able to sell product at price points that we've never sold in the past, but also the lifestyle component that we introduced, has sold really well and has been part of the new lifestyle components that we're adding to the collection. So we're able to open stores in Florida, in Dallas, in California, and we're not just, cemented in a down business today. But back to the logo piece, the other thing that is unusual and unique about Mackage, when I joined, we did a lot of shiny puffers with, huge branding, Mackage wordmark branding, which is amazing. And it's a certain customer who loves that. But in fashion, any logo is cyclical, right? So, like I said, I joined in 2021. We had the big logos. People were coming out of COVID. That's when we went back into quiet luxury. So I knew at that time that it wasn't a matter of having a giant logo or not having no logo. It was, what is the balance? And let's have a conversation now that we've introduced these higher tiers of price point. How do you put a giant logo on a $3,000 leather jacket? Is that the right decision? It's not the right decision. So we sat for hours and hours and days and months and, looked at our different customer profiles that we have. Do we have someone who always likes logo? Absolutely. And you will always find a version of logo in the collection, especially in our ski brand. And our ski is very technical, very performance, and ski is a different business, right? Because it's very flashy almost in a way. So it's acceptable to have endless logos on ski products. But, we were able to segment ourselves to two customers. I call them our finance guy or girl or our luxury customer. And then I also have the more streetwear customer as well. So, you have people who are, whether it's athletes in the NBA, even some soccer players or football players, or, we're able to flex between both. So we have a great representation of both on the floor. And we're able to target two different consumers, which is really interesting because I haven't really seen that with a lot of brands in my past. right? There's usually one logo, that's it. And it's either logo or no logo, and there's nothing in between. We've been able to kind of manage this every year, flex and take down the logo. But today we have a great balance of some logo and some non logo and various sizes of logos.
Getting the product right, addressing the white space, fine tuning the logo, that's on the one side of the business. In addition, you've expanded internationally. You have wholesale. You have your own stores. If you could, just share with us a little bit more in terms of the breakout of the business, wholesale to direct to consumer, US versus international, because you're really spread out in terms of your distribution and also where you are in the world.
Um, when I started, the wholesale business was quite large. I say large as a percentage. So at the time, it was at least 50% of our business, maybe a little bit more. And what I have learned in my past is usually when, and I understand it, that when brands are starting out, wholesale is always the place you go, right? Because you don't want to necessarily invest yet in capex and retail and e-com. So wholesale is always a great partner when you think about just geographically, right, where you have access to stores. Um, so that's usually where everyone starts, and that's where we were. And I think the challenge is you hit that inflection point where you're about to open your own stores or you have opened your own stores and you've launched your own e-com, then it's really understanding what what wholesale or which wholesaler is the right partnership, right? I think no matter what, in America, in the US, and in Canada to a certain extent, but more so in the US, wholesale will always be super important, no matter what anyone says, right? With all of the naysayers out there. However, I think the best way to partner with wholesale is to make sure that your brand is in the top doors, right? So it's the 80-20 rule, right? 20% of the stores represent 80% of the revenue. So when I came in, we pulled back on a lot of doors because they weren't necessarily the right stores for us. Stores as in accounts, but also doors in terms of locations, whether it was in a Neiman's, a Saks, a Bloomingdale's, for example. And so really focusing on those top tier doors that drive the business and can sell the higher price points, right? That's really the name of the game. So throughout my journey here, we were very well represented in Canada, as I mentioned, from a retail footprint. We opened our new Soho store as I joined. We also have opened Short Hills, um, a new Madison Avenue store, which we opened in February of this year. We had a store across the street. We doubled the size. We're now 3 floors across the street. Um, we have Boston. We have opened a Paris flagship store. Also, 3 stores in Japan, and we also have 3 stores in China. So we definitely have distribution globally. We are heavier in Canada than we are anywhere else, which makes sense because that's where we were founded. But over the next 12 months, the plan would be to really focus on Europe. So London, Milan, Zurich, we do really well in Switzerland, for example. And obviously, we know this just from Google Analytics and our e-com sales that we have around the world. But then the US is still a huge opportunity for us, right? So Chicago, King of Prussia, Dallas, South Coast Plaza. So these are some of the places that we're continuing to look at. We may open London this year, actually in the UK. And then obviously China, a huge growth opportunity for us. We need to open a store in Korea. And Japan today with 3 stores and wholesale, we're in a good place. But China and Korea, in terms of Asia, are a massive opportunity for us. But it's, again, it's the chicken and the egg. It's the storytelling to tell the story for the brand awareness, for people to know the brand, and then for the brand to then continue to open retail stores as part of the DTC expansion.
How do you do this? Do you do this with partners abroad, or are you opening these stores yourself?
So today we have a partner in China and we have a partner in Japan. So 2 partners. Korea is in-house with us. And then in Europe, so we have an office in Korea, we have an office in Paris, which is our European office. We have an office in Montreal, and we have an office in New York. So as we continue to grow, we'll reassess on whether we take it in-house, whether we continue with partnerships. That's really the next kind of stage of growth as we continue this trajectory.
That's a heavy lift opening up in all those countries. Not
Yeah.
not an easy task to do and not inexpensive either.
No.
It brings me to the next part of what I want to talk to you about, which is marketing and also collaborations. Yeah, I'm sure working for private equity, like most private equities, they love to scrutinize how much you're spending and how much marketing is. How do you take your marketing dollars and spread it around the world and still be effective with it? I mean, I'm guessing, and you could just shake your head if my guess is close to accurate. You spend between 10 and 20% of sales on marketing. Is that a fair range
Uh,
ish?
I would say 10 is fair. 10,
Okay.
and we'll
Closer to
cap it at
10.
that right now.
Okay.
Um, so it's again, this whole chicken and the egg conversation is so complex in terms of growth because you either invest to grow, right? So that you can increase brand awareness, you can increase stores, you can increase footprint, and therefore increase sales, or you invest slowly and see what happens and then move into the next phase. So it's kind of a balance between both. But as part of our marketing strategy, the one thing we really tried to do is A, balance the men and women, right? So that you have the female and the male, just like we talked about in the beginning. But the second piece is also when we choose talent, or whether it's a celebrity and an athlete, we very much put a focus on where the talent is from. So I'll give you a perfect example. Kyler Murray, he was the quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals, and has since been traded, and we did a Protect Your Craft campaign with him. So he's American. He's half black, half Korea. So Koreans love Kyler Murray. So we thought, okay, great idea. Let's use an NFL quarterback, fan of the brand, authentic relationship, but also be able to tell that story in Korea in an effective way so that we're able to cast our net in a very wide, arena. And did we isolate the Europeans, perhaps, because does Europe watch the NFL? Not so much. And do they know who Kyler Murray is? Maybe. But at the same time, it was giving Kyler exposure, right? Because we have so many NFL teams who are now playing in Europe when they do the games that they do as part of the opening season. So that was an example of Kyler, but we've also used many, football players. When I say football, I mean soccer players. So some of the Croatian football players that we've used who are well known because they play for Man City, for example, Joško Gvardiol, a defender, amazing player from Croatia, plays in the Premiership, which is huge, right? So Americans know, Canadians know, Europeans know. So every time we have someone, everyone ticks a couple of boxes. I don't have the luxury of having, 20 different athletes, 20 different celebrities that I have access to in order to do that. So we're very strategic and very calculated about the way we use athletes, and we use um, uh, celebrities in campaigns so that we can make sure that not only is it exposure for us, but it's also exposure for them. So, is there an area, for example, using Yoshko as the example, would Yoshko like more PR and more visibility in America? Sure. So, when we do these types of collaborations, then we obviously work with the New York Times and people in the US who will give more visibility to Yoshko. But then in Europe, where Yoshko is huge, we get more visibility as a brand, and we're able to open more stores and do additional business because of that. So every single person that we choose has a reason and a meaning, and also 9 out of 10 times a very authentic relationship. It's someone we know and have a relationship with already, who's a friend and fan of the brand.
So you're making a big bet on the Croatian soccer team. As we go into the World Cup, which the timing couldn't be any better, fingers crossed that Croatia does well,
Yes.
garners all the eyeballs in the world. When you think about social media and
Mhm.
impressions, what kind of KPIs are you looking at to justify these collaborations and the marketing expense associated with collaborations?
So the marketing expense is something that we, like I said to you, have a very limited pot. So you are taking bets, right? You're taking bets on, okay, if I choose this person, are they going to resonate? If I choose this team, are they going to resonate? And there's, quite frankly, today, based on our size, there's some people we just can't even afford to have the conversation with, meaning, am I sponsoring the New York Knicks in the next, in their next tunnel walk? Obviously not, right? These are things that
Not
are,
this year.
yeah, exactly. Who knows? But Croatia was a bit of a different story in that, like I said, I'm Croatian, so I had the relationship with some of the players already. So that's the other thing that is really unique about this brand, which I love, is that a lot of the marketing and a lot of the activations we do are based on relationships and based on having fans already of the brand and then bringing it to fruition. So sponsoring Croatia, obviously a country near and dear to my heart, but a country that's not dissimilar to Mackage in that it's a country of 3.8 million people. They punch above their weight in everything they do when it comes to sports, not just football. So if we look at the World Cup over the last however many years, Croatia either makes the final or the semifinal in the World Cup, and hopefully this year will win the final. That would be my ultimate dream, right? So they are, a country of people who are resilient, who are uber professionals, who love what they do, and there's so many synergies with them and Mackage because we're this smaller, brand who came from Canada, and we very much punch above our weight in a lot of the campaigns that we do and a lot of the people that we dress, in our results that we've had for the last couple of years. So there was an instant kind of marriage there with, these two, this country and us. So we are sponsoring the World Cup. We actually launch on this Thursday. As part of the World Cup launch, you'll obviously see tons of assets and amazing photo shoot and content that we have. But in addition to that, we'll also be launching sneakers as part of the World Cup package. And this is another foray into a product category where we've done footwear in the past with boots, but we've never done sneakers before. And coming from Jimmy Choo and having contacts in the shoe world, we were able to put together a really great design team. But again, the sneaker is not just a sneaker. It has to tick the boxes that we talked about before. It has to be aesthetically pleasing, and it also has to be functional, and it has to be technical in order for it to be Mackage. So we will be launching sneakers as part of the World Cup, as part of our World Cup package. And then the other part of the World Cup package that's really interesting is it's this spring summer package. There's no coats, there's no down, there's no heavy outerwear. So there's really, really great summer product that people can wear now, whether it's knitwear, polos, pants, different things, shirts, blazers, really, really great Mackage product for this time of the year. So these are all the things, from your beginning questions, how do you make something from an outerwear brand into a lifestyle brand? And these type of product extensions and cultural relevance in these huge places like the World Cup where you have millions and billions of eyeballs watching, we think is a great opportunity to really tell our story and to do it with a group of friends, i.e. the Croatian national team, who we're also cheering for.
Oh, it's blindingly clear to me that you have such a great passion for this brand and a background that really lends itself to how you develop the product, the future, the roadmap for Mackage. Share with us a little bit more about your leadership style. If there's a mantra that you have or an inner focus that you use to really help guide your team.
Um, my team in any company I've been in, and it's kind of something I've done since I started at Ralph Lauren until I got here, I really work hard at fostering relationships with my team. And what I mean by that is I am not a micromanager. I blindly trust people based on their merit, based on their history, based on, where they've been, what they've done. Um, and I really entrust those people with the pedigree that they have, with the knowledge they have, the training that they have to be able to do the best job that they can in whichever company I'm in. It doesn't mean that every person that I've had in different positions fits in all company cultures, because I think every company has a different culture. And that's the one mistake I learned early was you can't, it's not a cookie cutter, right? You can't just take people from Ralph Lauren and put them in Canada Goose. You can't just take people from Marc Jacobs and put them in Jimmy Choo. There has to be a time of understanding the culture and understanding the strengths and weaknesses and what certain people can bring to the table. So I would tell you that the executive team I have today um, is a compilation of those people. I have people from Marc Jacobs, I have people from Ralph Lauren, I have people from Jimmy Choo. And so they're people that I know and I trust and I know can build teams and coach teams and manage teams and inspire teams, right? And I think when you trust people and you're able to not micromanage, it gives people the confidence to be able to take the ball and run, right? I can't do everything. There's certain things I'm good at, and there's certain things I'm not good at all. And I understand where the weaknesses are or the strengths are and how to it's almost like a matchmaker, how you bring the right people for those roles for what you need at the time. Because what I need at Mackage is very different from what I needed at Jimmy Choo, right? Jimmy Choo was already a huge brand, same thing with Marc Jacobs, same thing at Ralph Lauren. So having personalities and people that you know that you can trust who have talents and can bring so much experience to the role is hugely important, and hiring people and being so transparent from the beginning, right? Because setting people up to fail is the worst thing that can happen. So I'm very transparent, whether it's good or bad. I'm very transparent also while hiring people so that they understand that if you were in a corporate environment, like I learned, right, whether it's LVMH or anywhere, and you move to a startup, that's a private equity founder situation, not everyone can do that. It's a very, very, very difficult role that comes with a lot of different stresses that you need to manage from a personality standpoint, et cetera. So I believe in allowing, giving people the freedom to do what they were hired to do. And listen, if it all goes wrong, then it's obviously a very different conversation, right? How do we get back on track? What did we do wrong? How do we learn? So for me, and maybe this is the wrong answer, but what has worked for me is bringing people from my past, right? It's almost like a coach putting together a football team or putting together a hockey team, bringing, if you need a striker, if you need a point guard, if you need, you need to know what those roles are and where the holes are. And as a coach, all of those people also need to come together, and bring that star quality and win the games, right? And I think that's why I love sports so much, because I do think that there's so many similarities between sports and fashion, right? Because fashion moves so fast, it changes every day. You can have a good game, you can have a bad game, and you just have to continue to work with that team and build that team and motivate that team and have one goal. And now it's what that goal is, right? Is it to win the NBA championships? Is it to win the Stanley Cup? Is it to win the World Cup? And then everyone marches that way, right? Everyone works together and brings that partnership together. And that's the only way that I can succeed, because I can't do all of this, right? It's not me. It's the teams that are able to, band together and hit those 3-point shots like last night.
As you continue to garner more and more confidence that the strategy is moving in the right direction, um, how do you take risks, or are you a risk taker? And if you are, is there a risk you can point to that was a success and maybe one that didn't pan out so well?
Um, I think I am a risk taker, absolutely. I think in at Macaj, I think this is probably for me the most risk, because when you're at LVMH or you're at Ralph Lauren or even at Jimmy Choo, there's a head office that says this is what the marketing campaign is going to be. Everyone's going to execute it. So you're really not hands off, but you don't really, you're moving things along and everyone's moving to a greater good because it's such a big company. But when you're a CEO in a smaller company, all of this is risk, right? How do I know that Charlie Hunnam is going to work as the face of Mackage last year? How did I know that? I still don't know if Croatia will be a success, right? I mean, whether they win the World Cup or not. How do I know whether people will react negatively or positively to the campaign? I don't know. But it's also having I guess, the confidence to make a choice. Making choices, you have to make choices. You have to be, yes or no. The gray doesn't work for me. And so, um, yeah, there's just so many different things. We did a campaign, and I'll tell you a campaign again, whether it worked or not, I don't know the answer to that question. But back to your logo conversation, I came into Mackage. I walked into a showroom of shiny puffers with huge branding, which to me looked, and we were going into market in 2 weeks, and it looked very 90s. And we didn't have a marketing campaign, and we didn't have a face of the brand, and we didn't have the budget for it. So I started thinking, okay, who's from the 90s? Who could this resonate with, And I noticed that a lot of our consumers were, a little more on the streetwear, side of the world. And from my world of Marc Jacobs, I knew Little Kim. So I called Little Kim and said, hey, do you want to be in a Mackage campaign? And she was in a great campaign, and she sold a lot of jackets. Now, some people might say to you, okay, but that was 5 years ago. And Howard, that's not luxury. That's more of a streetwear or more of a, an urban cultural moment. But it was a risk I took. And it was a risk I took because I had, shiny jackets with huge branding, which resonated with me in the 90s with rap. Who was the queen of the 90s? Little Kim. You know, these are just ideas. Some of them may be bad. You might be saying to yourself, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard, but it worked. It worked. Are we doing another, shiny branded puffer campaign? We may do it in a different way, but again, you have to look at the resources you have. You know that you have a job to do, and you have to cobble together the best result that you can. And it must have worked because we continue to grow. And oh, by the way, we're not only selling shiny puffer jackets with huge branding today. We're selling $3,500 shearling coats. We're selling beautiful leather trenches. We're selling ready to wear. So again, I think it's up to the audience on whether they think it was good or bad. Same thing with Andy Cohen. Andy Cohen, in January did a mini campaign with us. He wore a jacket on New Year's Eve, huge eyeballs. The jacket sold out. But I don't know that I would have thought of Andy off of the top of my head, right? And then we did a campaign with him, and again, it was successful. So I think our customer enjoys the storytelling and these little curveballs we throw, because you either relate to it or you don't, but it's never gray, right? It's not so polarizing that people have a really bad reaction. But I think that, testing those things is the luxury of having a brand that's still in growth mode, that you're able to look at the analytics and say, okay, this worked, this didn't work. Let's move on. And sometimes it doesn't work because it's a bad product or because it's a bad campaign. The timing just wasn't right. That's the thing in fashion, right? Sometimes you're too early, sometimes you're too late. And that's something that if you're on time all the time, then I probably wouldn't be sitting here right now, because I would be, sitting on an island somewhere, because I would be so rich from just nailing every single thing that I've done. But I'm not.
All right, let's wrap up with rapid fire.
Sure.
Here we go. Other than Mackage, favorite brand?
I think if you asked me that question 15 years ago, I would have had an answer for you. Today, I would tell you there's so many brands, but I'm not loyal to any brands. So it depends on the season, right? I could be a Saint Laurent girl one week. I could be a Ralph Lauren girl one week. I could be a Celine girl one week. It changes all the time. And I think that has to do with what we just finished talking about, marketing and the way brands are presenting themselves right now.
My wife gave me that memo also. She subscribes to obviously the same shopping pattern that you
It's
do.
hard. Yeah.
When not working, you like to.
I'd like to be the mom of a 14-year-old equestrian, because that has taught me a whole new level of stress in my life, but also exciting. And it goes back to my love of sports, and just, being with my daughter, traveling with my daughter, being in this horse world I've never been in before, which is a whole different world, and enjoying that experience as she grows.
Favorite streamed show?
Right now, if we're talking today,
It could be
I'm ve
or ever.
well,
Either way,
I
we can go back. There's so many.
well, today, I love the John Hamm show, the Neighbors and what's it called? That
Yeah,
one, but
that one.
I love that one, but I also love I'm a huge fan of my god, I can't remember the name, Jason Bateman. Uh,
Which he did a few.
no, the one
Ozark? Ozark?
Ozark. Love Ozark.
Got
Love
it. All
Ozark.
right. The mentor who inspired you most?
Um, Probably my mom, because that's how I got into this. That's how everything has happened in my life, because of my mother and the reason I'm in fashion and the reason I think I have the work ethic, the passion, all of that, I think is my mother is my biggest mentor.
If you could meet anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
I have 2 people. One would be Princess Diana, and the second would be and they're polar opposites, the other one would be Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs, for me, from a storytelling, from a branding, like his execution and his thought process and what he created at Apple is, to me, mind blowing.
Tanya, congratulations on the positioning and the
Thank you.
business at Mackage. It's one that we're going to watch carefully. It's
Thank you so
exciting.
much.
I am in the stores. I'm in there. I'm checking it out. I've noticed there's more men's and that there's more wear now product, which is great.
Yes,
So
thank you.
I I will send you feedback as I have it. But I just wanted to thank you for
I
being
appreciate it.
with me today. My
Thank you, Ken.
pleasure.
Thank
And
you.
with that, we'll land this flight of the Retail Pilot. Thanks for tuning in to this week's flight of the Retail Pilot. And please give us a review on your favorite podcast platform.